morning, everyone. I'm Accenture Joshi, and I welcome you all on behalf of Mergerware to the M&A Summit 2021. The goal of this summit is to bring together thought industry leaders to give talks that are idea-focused and on a wide range of M&A subjects to foster learning, inspiration, and provoke conversations that matter. Mergerware is truly honored to organize this event in association with Accenture, Mercer, HR M&A Roundtable, and LIGL. I would also like to let you know that after the event gets over, the recorded version will be shared with all our attendees. So we have a fantastic program lined up for you. We have 3 amazing panel discussions of about 1 hour each on different topics. I'm sure you all are really excited about all the amazing conversations that we are going to have today. So without further ado, let's dive into our first panel discussion on the topic, cross-border post-merger integration. We have Nitin Kumar as the moderator for this panel discussion. Our guest speakers for the first panel are Greg Albert, Jeff Desroches, Jim Buckley, and Rishabh Mishra. So over to you, Nitin.
Thank you, Akansha, and thank you, Mergerware, for having us here. So let's go through a quick round of introductions. My name is Nitin Kumar. I've been in M&A for more than 25 years, and I recognize many of the attendees. I've worked with most of you pretty directly. It's strange to see such a small world. I have been in-house with companies like Hewlett-Packard. I've been consulting with Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte, and FTI and the likes. In my career, I've seen about 1,000 deals, several diligences, many integrations, many specialized versions of M&A like hostile takeovers, platforms, and the likes, carve-outs and divestitures as well. I've done $100 billion transaction and $100 million transaction and everything in between. I'm also honored to be moderating a panel with such high horsepower and experience. It is atypical that I get to hang out with people with decades of experience like we have on the panel. And it's going to be a very interesting session given everybody has a different view on cross-border M&A. So let's go in alphabetical order from here. Greg, why don't you introduce yourself?
Fabulous. Thank you, Kumar. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourself. My name is Greg Albert. I'm a managing director in Accenture Strategy, focused exclusively on our M&A practice. We all work cross industry, although I spend most of my time in high-tech energy, chemicals, and telecom. I don't have 1,000 deals under my belt like Kumar, but I probably have about 250 if you include my days starting my career in venture capital at Kleiner Perkins before going in-house at Corp Dev at a Fortune 100 chemicals company. And I've been in consulting for about 10 years, first at a pure play strategy firm, and now at the largest consulting firm in the world, Accenture. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Jeff?
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me on the panel. I'm Jeff Desroches. I do corporate development strategy and corporate development for VAT, which is the leading vacuum valve manufacturer in the world, primarily for semiconductor and industrial applications. So I've got about 25 years in industry. Most of that has been in and around the semiconductor industry and various other industrial, some life science companies as well. And about 13 years doing strategy and corporate development. And you know, a lot of my talked about, but nevertheless, yeah. So 25 years in industry, 13 years doing strategy and corporate development. Most of that in the semiconductor industry, and as well as some other industrial manufacturing and life science industry market companies.
Great. Jim?
Hi, good morning. Yeah, Jim Buckley. I am the VP of Global Merger and Integration, Merger and Acquisition Integration at VMware. I have been doing M&A for a very long time. I won't give numbers because people will figure out how old I am. I have been doing M&A in high tech specifically, so I don't have the breadth of some of the experience on this panel with their backgrounds, which I'm really happy to be included in. I have done hundreds of deals, but not thousands like Nitin. So I'm really impressed, and Nitin brings a wealth of experience and background to this panel. I started out in finance and operations at Sun Microsystems back in the 80s, and that's kind of a normal transition for many into M&A integration, and it's turned out to be a really fun career, and I've learned a lot. So I look forward to contributing to this panel. Thank you.
Last but not the least, Rishabh.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Nitin. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, wherever you are. I'm Rishabh Mishra. I lead corporate development M&A for a company called InfoStretch. It is a leading tech services firm headquartered in the Silicon Valley, backed by financial sponsors like Goldman Sachs and Everstone Capital. So I have been in the business of M&A for a couple of decades. First 15 years was investment banking, advising companies on all kinds of deals, primarily M&A across sectors and geographies. And then since 2006, I have been focused on in-house M&A integration as well, apart from transactions. So I work with companies primarily in tech services space in India and in US. Earlier, I was with a company owned by Bain Capital called LIGL, and very privileged to be here and talk about something which is very close to my heart. Like everybody else here, I think I'm myself looking forward to the conversation and learning a lot from the esteemed panel. We can get started, Nathan, if you're okay.
Absolutely, thank you. As you all notice, there's a wealth of experience here, and hopefully our esteemed panelists can share some meaningful experiences which can enhance value. One important thing here is that obviously cross-border M&A and culture cannot be separated. All of our panelists recognize that, and we are happy to take any pointed questions in that direction. However, there is a separate panel that covers that, and I'm sure there is a very experienced crew who's going to handle that. So if we are going light on that specific area of M&A, it's by design for the session, because I think everybody recognizes how important it is. However, specific questions are always welcome and happy to answer. Anybody on this panel is happy to answer. So let's dive right in, and let's go on to the geographic diversity, and every country obviously has its own nuances. My question goes to Greg first. Could you go into what are the nuances of cross-border deals by industry and its applicability? And maybe Jim, you can add your wealth of experience and commentary after that as well.
No, it's a great leading question, and it's not one that can be answered in bullet points or talked news 30-second squibs, but I'll do the best I can. So as you mentioned, global deals are, no two deals are created equal, certainly, whether it's buy side, sell side, pre-deal, post-deal, all of the value drivers and value levers are going to be a little bit different. The global nature of transactions are quite distinct relative to different industries. So for example, leading right now, actually, a very large industrials merger integration with 72 countries that are involved. Every country has their nuances. Every country has the different legal complexities, let alone intellectual property and hard asset, tangible asset considerations. Very different from another deal that I'm leading that has 23 countries that's fully in software. So it doesn't have the plants or manufacturing or tangible assets that a industrials company would have. So the considerations are quite different. Not easier, not harder, but certainly very, very different. The cultural aspects, I know that that's kind of out of bounds, but how we go about governance, how we think about structuring the overall integration management office and the decision-making process, pre-deal and let alone through the close window, are very, very different, as well as managing a lot of the talent issues that come up, especially given the great resignation that we're right in the middle of, because nothing could be scarier if you're a part of a company that's being acquired, and when the market is as white hot as it is right now, is staying ahead of that curve by talking to employees actively, ensuring that there's not a lot of attrition through the close window, and giving as much detail and fidelity as possible about the vision of the transaction to ensure that people have all of the information that they need and that they stay on board, not only through day one and the close event, but also through the integration to create value for all parties concerned. And that doesn't just mean shareholders, right? That means people being able to have a career that is robust, that where they continue to learn and grow and develop every day. Because it's a very personal decision as you think about the people aspects of an integration. So that's just one example in terms of the differences in industries from a cross-border global transaction perspective.
Yeah, and I can add some to that. I think what Greg said is all of our experience on cross-border deals. And my experience in that is the way to stitch all these nuances together, at least the best way in my experience, is via communication. I think being really clear about what's going on and when it's going to happen to all on both sides of the transaction, quite honestly, I think, I'm sure on this panel, the acquirer can be as unsettled by an acquisition as the company to be acquired. And I think that's typically missed, quite honestly. So I think a lot of those nuances can be best addressed via well thought out, timely communications. And saying too little, too late actually destroys deal value, doesn't create deal value. But I'm not a comms person. I'm a finance and ops guy, but I leverage my comms team heavily to make sure that we're working hard to create value via the communications to the topic of how nuances can be. Stitching it all together helps drive the value going forward.
Thank you, Jim and Greg. That was terrific. Question again, Jim, if I can just take you up on that and extend that to a little bit more about the function-specific nuances, right? For example, there are finance-specific nuances, there are supply chain-related nuances, and many others. So how does that impact functions in your experience, and what have you seen and observed?
Yeah, no, this is another great extension of this topic. So cross-border, the people side is obviously key. People are typically a huge value of any acquisition. And every country has different, we all understand and have experienced the worker council challenges in Europe. I think when you get over into Asia, there's other issues about, what sort of stipends they might receive, transit stipends in Tokyo. So making sure that every function through the due diligence process starts to think about the challenges that are going to occur in integration and integration planning is really, really key to highlight early. R&D engineers speak kind of a universal language, ones and zeros in high tech, right? Especially software. So that's a universal, that's less of a challenge, quite honestly, in my experience. But when you get into finance and legal and the HR side of things, it can get very complicated very quickly. So I think it's important to leverage in-country, in-region resources early, whether it's internal or external. Some of my best friends on some of my bigger cross-border deals are the lawyers that are in-country because they understand what's going on the ground. I have actually been accused of being a lawyer before, which I'm not, but I hang around them so much. I tend to use a lot of legal words. So the functions are key. I think the getting on top of that sooner rather than later, again, is going to be key to creating value post-close.
Well, this is great. And Jim, thanks for alluding to that, because strategy informs the diligence, which further informs the integration. And we need to be cognizant about similarities and differences. And Jeff, looks like you've played the entire spectrum from strategy to diligence through integration. What have you observed and how have your experiences been shared?
Yeah, if I could, I certainly agree with all that. If I could emphasize a couple of points first, one of the things, having done deals from Cologne to Seoul and points in between, I can tell you that one of the things to keep in mind is that, and particularly for people that are maybe new getting into the area or on their first project or aspiring to go into this area, is a lot of the basic blocking and tackling of doing the deal, planning out the diligence, planning out the integration, executing, your checklist, your playbook, all of that stuff a lot of that can still be used. That's all still good. You don't need to, I don't think, while we're going to focus on the nuances between cross-border and domestic deals, don't throw out your current process, right? Lean on that, start with that, but then recognize that there are nuances to doing international deals. And that leads to my second general point about this, I guess, is that really want to emphasize a point that Jim made about getting local expertise. Not only internal, if you've got your internal people in country, then absolutely you want to involve them in the project, but also external advisors locally there that know the nuances. And particularly, there's a couple areas where I think that really is valuable. And in particular in the legal area, I mean, I think it almost seems like a no-brainer that you're going to involve some local legal expertise in your deal. But honestly, you might be surprised how many companies try to kind of do it on their own if they have the resources available. And I'd say, while it may cost a little bit more money, it's money well spent. And I look at it almost like an insurance policy against future issues. And the legal regime can impact a lot of different aspects of the deal structure, asset versus share deal with respect to liability and tax implications, payment, contingent consideration or earnout, tax and payment implications, schedule implications on that. Jurisdiction also is really important. Oftentimes, if you're in the U.S., usually you negotiate a jurisdiction to be in Delaware. If you're in the EU, you might be UK or Switzerland. If you're in Asia, you might settle on Singapore. And these are just generalizations, not legal advice, but generally in my experience. But all of those, typically like to be dealing with in an environment where there's an ample body of corporate law, right, backing up the activities that occur, particularly if there's issues. Jim mentioned the HR aspect, so I won't go back over that. I strongly feel that having some local HR expertise is really valuable in the deal. The third one I'll mention, though, is just briefly is finance as well, finance and tax in particular. The different rules with respect to revenue recognition, reporting and accounting treatments can vary dramatically. And one thing I'll emphasize is that you can always count on sellers to try to minimize their tax burden. So, and that can manifest itself in different ways in different countries. And I would say always keep an eye out for that. And again, the local expertise will help you to sift through those challenges.
Excellent. Jeff, thanks for that. That was very insightful. Rish, you've done deals both from the investment banking side as well as in more functional and corporate roles. How do different risk profiles manifest when you do cross-border M&A? And I don't want to index on the risk alone, the opportunity profile as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cross-border M&A can be in various, a lot of drivers can be driving the particular deal. Like, for example, I think the risks are lowest in pure conglomerate acquisitions. The companies involved are probably not involved in the same business, definitely not in the same geography, which has associated it. So those are, I think, the least risky ones when it comes to integration. On the contrary, the risk is highest in case of horizontal mergers when one company is trying to either get into a new market scale or eliminate competition, reduce costs. There is a lot of overlap. The cross-border integration is the most challenging and risky. But the fact is that most cross-border deals, at least in my experience, I've seen their main aim is to either extend market or a product offering in a new geography. And these deals, have attributes of, vertical, what we commonly call as vertical acquisitions or mergers, which are inherently quite risky. And cross-border makes them even more complex for integration. I think I'll agree with Jim earlier. He was saying, I think the involvement of the target company and in-country teams is critically important in cross-border deals integration. I think that to reduce the risk, it's best to create an integration plan depending on the nature of the deal and the objectives with involvement of the target company's management team. And I think not just in the planning stage, but in the execution, which by the way is most critical, is best to involve the local in-country teams to execute on the execution on the plans that have been built by the target companies, I mean, in collaboration with the target companies management team.
Excellent. So that that kind of summarizes how the functions and deal types kind of work differently. And if you take the common theme of what our panelists said, it's very clear that we still need to respect the process, but understand similarities and differences. We need to understand what industries are, rely on local expertise, respect the process, but don't run a mercenarial playbook there because every deal is different. So that's been the general takeaway that all our panelists said. Friends, we do have one question from the audiences. The question is, with the economic climate changing every now and then, what should be the focus on cross-border acquisition and post-acquisition? So it's a great question, right? And I'm curious to get everyone's views. Now you have currency arbitrage, you have talent arbitrage. Now deals come in cycles. There are buy side, sell side, divestitures start to go up. Mega deals start to go down. So there's a lot of thematic stuff that happens with the macroeconomic factors impacting M&A. But let's get some of our panelists' view on this as well.
I mean, this is Greg. I would jump in and say, first of all, at least throughout my entire career, the macroeconomic situation is always in flux, right? So as the saying goes, you never step in the same river twice. So there's always change afoot, no matter if you're talking about October 21st, 2021, or October 21st, 2011, or 2001, whatever it is, there's always a change. But I think, to do cross-border merger integration or any transaction quite well, I think takes a little bit of being able to sit well with ambiguity, because as the chess pieces move around the board, whether the macroeconomic, microeconomic, live through geopolitical considerations today, is trying your best to take any headwinds, such as regulatory processes are taking longer and longer around the world, whether it's in the US, Hart-Scott-Rodino, the equivalent in the EU, SAMR in China, etc. The regulatory processes are taking longer in order to get in as a condition to get deals done. But while that's a headwind, we do our best to use that as an opportunity. So for example, when you have a deal that is 9 to 12 to 18 month long close windows, you have that opportunity to measure twice, cut once in advance of day one, and to get a really high level of fidelity around the value drivers, the synergy capture ideas through concepts like clean room, where you have third parties being able to see competitive information to be able to pull forward some of the synergy targets that have either been expressed to the street or built into management plans as you think about value creation. Just to be real tactical, there's all different kinds of synergies, top line, bottom line, etc. Thinking with one client right now who's a total objective in terms of the investment case is around top line synergies, essentially cross-selling different intellectual property and technologies to the same customers as they quote unquote move up the stack in the hardware space in the tech sector. So we're being able to build out, due to the duration of the close window, a really clearly defined sales motion, as well as the account management from different customers, so that everybody understands who's on first when it comes to day one and who's accountable for what as you move through the post-close window. Taking that time, you can't ever roll back the clock. The DeLorean and Back to the Future doesn't exist, to my knowledge. So being able to use that disadvantage or the headwinds or macroeconomic situation or geopolitical that was asked for to your advantage when planning and executing an integration, this is kind of turning lemons into lemonade, if you will.
Anyone else wants to take a quick 1 minute stab on the question, because we need to move on as well.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing, and it'll be much less than a minute, I think Greg brought up the term headwind. In my experience, for every headwind, there's a tailwind. So if you try to plan for one or the other, it's going to turn around on you. So you just keep moving forward, stick to the strategy, and keep going.
Excellent. Jeff, while we have you, let's talk about regulation and the importance and complexities of the regulatory landscape. And you had some very astute observations and very amusing way of describing some of those. why don't we share that with the audiences here?
Well, it's certainly true, that when you're dealing with cross-border deals, you're very likely to run into the regulators at some point. And every country, of course, has different regulatory requirements and different process for approving those, and it's quite a specialty legal niche there as well. So I would tend to emphasize again the employment of some local expertise, as well as specialists in the legal regulatory realm. But I would say one of the things I would mention is, don't think that you need to apply for approval everywhere that you sell, for example, one widget per year or something like that. Just because you do a little bit of business in some far-flung country, you don't necessarily need to apply for approval in there. So what you really need to do is work with your advisors to assess whether or not being approved at some point would have a significant impact on your business, in terms of what's the likelihood of that happening, what's the severity of that happening. So and I'll highlight another point that Greg alluded to a minute ago, was, while you may have a good understanding of whether you'll be approved based on your market analysis and so on, what's harder is when you'll be approved, right? And that obviously impacts, the timing of the deal closing, and that's a little bit harder to predict. What I would say in general, assume it's going to take longer than you initially think it will, or certainly longer than you prefer it to take. One other thing I'll mention is that when you're thinking about the regulatory process, one of the key elements really is about how you define your market, right? So we throw this word around quite frequently in terms of the market. What's the market concentration? What's the market size? But really how you define the market, whether you define it broadly or more specifically, more narrowly, is really key when you go into to try to get approval. How you define it can really portray the market as being highly consolidated or potentially highly fragmented. So those are all things to consider. Where just a simple example might be, for example, online entertainment, right? Okay, that's a very, very broad term. Lots of different things can fall into that. If you talk about movie streaming, okay, well, now you're really only talking about a couple of leading players in that, which would be much more fragmented. So depending on how it may or may not make sense to define your market at different degrees of narrowness. So that's just something to consider.
No, this is absolutely fantastic, Jeff. Thank you for that. Jim, extending that question to you, oftentimes regulators and legal people are at least notionally thought to be very adversarial, but they're very, very critical to get the deal done and to maintain the integrity and the velocity of the entire M&A process. In your experience, how have you recruited them as allies, and what have been some of your success stories there?
Yeah, no. So as I alluded to earlier, I work, as we all do in M&A, we work with a lot of lawyers, and sometimes it's easy to slip into the persona of being a lawyer when one is not. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. And I do think it's important to understand, and Jeff alluded to this, the makeup, who's who in the regulatory body in that country. And one, you have to understand what the body is, what are their responsibilities, and typically, there's all different flavors of regulators in every country. And I think at the macro level, the important thing is to realize that while you're doing a cross-border deal, there are a lot of constituents involved in that. Doing a cross-border deal that's, headquartered in the US, that has business in Germany and Brazil. You got to understand what's going on in Germany and Brazil, and not just come bulldozing your way through in Brazil and Germany. One, regulators don't like that; they don't like to be bulldozed. One of my experiences was a deal we did at PayPal. It was a Swedish deal, LIGL, and they had a significant presence in the UK. So while the deal was approved in Sweden, it was questioned in the UK by the Competition and Markets Authority. And it was really important for us to make sure that we understood how best to inform the CMA of the macroeconomics of the deal, how we were in fact supporting competition, not destroying competition. And we leveraged in-country resources, external counsel that actually had people that had been on the CMA. And we really understood how they worked and how they thought. And we were able to go in and speak their language. We weren't coming in trying to just say, this is, we're PayPal, we're this, we're that, just to prove this and let's move on. It was a very lengthy process, but as we got to understand the personalities, we actually had profiles on all the CMA board members. And we understood where they came from, what their backgrounds were. And it really, really helped. It really helps when you go sit in one of their meetings, which is a little, it was daunting, quite honestly. I felt like I was sitting in the Supreme Court of the United States. I was almost expecting white powdered wigs and black robes. But I saw faces and I could connect their experience and their background to what we had to tell them. And it went really, really well. We were actually the only deal that year that was approved out of 8, I believe, that they had questions on. And I think a lot of it had to do with our approach. I mean, we certainly did our homework. We had our numbers buttoned down. We explained to them how we were actually supporting competition, not destroying competition. And their want is to say no. That's what regulators are sort of predisposed to do, is say, I understand where you're coming from, but no. I understand, no. But we were able to get through that, and we knew that was going to be part of the process. But I do think it's really, really important. I think the other example real quickly is, in Israel, the regulatory body around their R&D, the chief scientist, which I think now is called the Israel Innovation Authority. You got to understand how they're wired and what their job is as part of the Israeli government. And, because you're buying technology in Israel and you're going to do something with it outside of Israel, they're like, our technology, we got some skin in this game. And again, I think having that relationship really helps go a long ways to make sure you're not just sneaking one under them.
Nitin, do I have a couple seconds just to add to that?
Feel free.
Okay, just
I have another one coming for you, though, so please feel free to go ahead.
Oh, right, okay. Well, just real quick, I just want to double down on Jim's point about understanding who you're talking to. Understanding the audience is really, really important, and you can really leverage the expertise of your advisors in that perspective. Understanding whether the regulators are asking you questions because they're genuinely concerned about market consolidation and there's an argument to be made there, or are they just trying to? Is there another agenda? Are they just trying to gain knowledge? Is there some trade friction that they're sort of trying to retaliate for in some way? Is there, what's the dynamics around that can be really helpful? I have an example of that, but I won't go through it in the interest of time. But in any case, Jim's point's really good. I just want to double down on that one.
Yeah, so great. Summarizing on this theme is that understand who you're dealing with, understand what you're dealing with, understand where they're coming from. The goal is usually common. The posture may be adversarial, but it's not because of intent, right? That's basically what the panel has been saying. Now, friends, we have another question here. Actually, we have 2. Understanding the current scenario, M&A efficiency comes with finance and HR. Apart from this, data and analytics does play a heavy role. Now, this becomes an industry question, right? At least the world that Jim and me come from, or Rishabh comes from to an extent in the high tech. It's not necessarily true that back office is all the time contributing to the synergies. You could get on the pump for revenue synergies, which comes from product pricing and all that. Actually, oftentimes in recent transactions, you see that the back offices are underinvested with these small companies that you're buying. In fact, you have negative synergies there. So you need to go and get deal value from other places. Yes, data and analytics is absolutely critical, but in the TMT, tech, media, telecom world, it's definitely not just the 2 back office functions. IT can be as complex, right? So that's sort of my view on this. But Rish, feel free to add your views.
No, I completely agree. In fact, I won't take too much time. Just to build on what you said, in our space, in tech especially, the companies are growing so quickly. They're usually underinvested. And very interestingly, for the first time ever, we negotiated an earnout where we are forcing the sellers to invest more in back office and in finance, HR, because they never had the time to invest in the SG&A function. So completely agree, Nitin, that it is a very industry specific question, and most of the M&A we are seeing lately is in the TMT space, and where it's not necessary that you get all the efficiencies from the SG&A. It's usually from the revenue.
Jeff, there's a specific one because you live and breathe this. At the similar front, do cross-border deals face issues with supply chain resiliency? How much do companies actually investigate this? I guess there is no better person to answer this than you, Jeff.
I'm sure there's some other opinions on the panel as well, but yeah, so clearly the operational diligence that you do early in the process, and then the way you plan for that through integration is really critical. And particularly, I mean, today's current environment is a perfect example of that, where we're dealing with raw material shortages, pricing increases, shipping delays. I mean, you're seeing all of that. It really, I mean, the average person can just see it on the news. You don't even need to be a specialist in a particular industry, but dealing with all of these things. First of all, understanding the impact and the implications on your deal before you finally pull the trigger on it is really critical. Factoring that into your financial model, into your business plan, is important to understand. Are you going to be able to realize the value that you think you're going to be able to in the time you think you're going to be able to, as Rish mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of value capture. And then, of course, in the integration, you're doing a lot of detailed project management and tracking your metrics and KPIs and so on. And all of those things are being influenced, kind of extended, or perhaps in some cases compressed by these different supply chain challenges. So yeah, it's a big issue.
Greg, any thoughts from you on that, or Jim, or anybody else?
Just real quick, I think first of all the time, M&A is the opportunity to make a transformation where both companies or the buyer seller independently didn't have the intestinal fortitude or the requirements to make kind of a compressed transformation, to change the end-to-end scale of the business in a very material way, because it's hard. And a deal is a terrible thing to waste. So given some of the macroeconomic challenges that Jeff was talking about, given some of the considerations that everybody has been mentioning, taking advantage of a transaction, small, medium, large, almost doesn't matter, and thinking about what does this mean to the future organization, the future growth trajectory, the future value creation opportunities, where you just didn't want to do it, have the time to do it because you're moving so fast, putting out fires, running a business. This kind of gives the opportunity to be able to make those kind of systemic changes in the overall enterprise. So that's the only thing that I would highlight.
Excellent. So let's go into the next area that we want to look at, which are some unique nuances with these cross-border deals, particularly long poles in the tent, right? Every function in every country does not integrate at the same pace, and you have some issues. You can think about human resources that we talked about already. There's IT, legal, etc. So Jim or Greg, would you like to share your particular thoughts with some specific examples on that?
Yeah, I can kick it off, and I'm sure Greg will have some great ads. I think, the longest pole in the tent, in my experience, is the legal entity consolidation. Yeah. And I think that gets ignored a lot, and it just sort of it doesn't get thrown under the wall. It sort of gets buried in the dirt for somebody else to trip over later. And, people hear the term, they hear legal entity, they think lawyers. And it's so much more than that. It's actually everything. It's people, it's assets, it's finance, it's, the list goes on and on and on. And again, it kind of plays back into the regulatory topic. A lot of it is regulatory based. Like, what can we do? When can we do it? And then I think the other question that is acknowledged but not always answered is, how do we do it? And I think, there are small deals that I've worked on at Microsoft back in the day a little deal that was maybe $20 million in revenue, not a lot of people, but the last entity to close down was 3 years later. And it was just all based on what you could do and when you could do it. And you're sitting there, you didn't spend that much money on the company, and yet you're spending all this money for resources in country that have to kind of keep you current with what's going on. And you finally roll it up, you've spent another $1 million in legal fees and tax advice on top of a $10 million deal. And you're like, we didn't really think about that early on. And so that's actually something I think Jeff was talking about, due diligence. It goes, some of these things that are easy to gloss over because you're just like, yeah, we'll figure it out. And then you're sitting there 3 years later going, I kind of wish we had figured this out early in the deal, not later in the deal. And that's, that to me is the biggest long pole, is legal entity consolidation.
Yeah, and kind of building on Jim's point, I'd say a derivative of the legal entity considerations. When you talk long pole in the tent, I guess I would define it as, when does the IMO cease to exist? When is the integration, quote unquote, done? All right, and it gets to close to business as usual as possible. And one of the long poles that we see is around the functional activity. Right. So, mentioning HR and finance are great examples, but those are all, a lot, whatever your platforms are, they all flow through IT. And I can barely spell IT, even though I work for Accenture, right? Is that I have some real deep expertise and colleagues who come in that can talk infrastructure, application rationalization, and portfolio redesign, data management, structured and unstructured. And all of that legs together with a business as usual ongoing as a business when the IMO dissolves. And the legal entity point is great, because I guess I underappreciated that on one of the deals that I worked on pre-COVID, where because publicly traded, all of the company codes were done on a legal entity by legal entity basis around the world. So as we thought about the legal entity considerations and consolidations that Jim was articulating, when the IT team needed to think about, what does this mean from I don't know if it was SAP or Oracle, one of the big ERP providers, and how did they stand that up so it meets the requirements for, at least in this case, was a publicly traded company with Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, and the auditors are always looking for red flags to pull up. So it all kind of knits together into what you had called the long pole in the tent. And I think the management of it, like the way that we used to do it, like when I don't have as long of a beard as Jim, but I think the days of doing integration planning and execution in Excel and SharePoint and emails are over, right? It's inefficient, it's ineffective. You need to maximize the value of your people. So there's a lot of very interesting, pretty slick, user-friendly technology that's out there that lets you manage the planning all the way up from pre-deal, right? The diligence through planning, through execution, with a single source of truth. And that includes all of the, I'd say the PMO weenie stuff, like raid logs, risks, actions, integration, synergy tracking, but also being able to be laser focused on the value creation. Some of these tools are really unique. And leveraging technology today helps, I don't want to say shorten the pole of the long pole in the tent, but certainly makes it less pointy, to continue my terrible mixed metaphor. But anyway, that's just my thought.
Very insightful. Thank you, Greg and Jim. So Rish, nowadays, if coronavirus doesn't make it into a panel, we feel incomplete, right? Coronavirus has to make it into every panel and every deal. So how have you navigated deals around the modern day challenge of COVID?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Nitin. I think what has happened in the last 18, 19 months, we've all quickly adapted to in fact, people are closing more deals than the pre-COVID times because it's become easier, you don't have to travel. So closing has become much easier. But sadly, the integration has become, in my view, very, very challenging. And I know there is a separate session on culture, but I think the key problem is understanding the culture of the target companies in this remote working environment is the biggest challenge. No matter how much we talk about culture, I think the fact is that it's like an iceberg. There's a lot more than you can see on the surface. And, doing things remotely, you may have the best of the best strategy, but executing on it until you meet people in person is very, very challenging. So I think the biggest drawback in the M&A world COVID is on the integration on the cross-border deal, especially where it's an unknown territory for most buyers, and cultures may be very, very different. And until and unless you break bread with people and meet them in person, it's very, very difficult. Though the number of deals have gone up in terms of closures, but I think COVID has really made it very difficult for cross-border integration.
Jeff, any thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I mentioned the supply chain aspects, I think earlier when we had that question. So I won't go back through that, but the just real quick with regard to Rish has made some good points about the challenges of doing M&A in general and M&A integration in particular in an environment where you really can't travel very much, and most of this is having to be done remote. And I remember when this first started, when the lockdown started and so on, I kind of thought about, well, how much of my job can I do completely remotely? And I think about 90-95% of an M&A deal or so you can do pretty much remotely. But the part that's really, really difficult, and this won't come as a shock to anybody, is the relationship building part. And that's key in a few different elements. And I know Rich just highlighted this. Again, I'll just emphasize it, is that in the beginning, from an integration standpoint, in the beginning, when you're going to have a lot of challenges in that project, typically in a larger one, and it's very tactical activity. You're working very closely with one another. You need some trust, you need communication. Establishing that purely via Zoom or some other remote method is very difficult to do. Earlier in the process, I would say, convincing a seller to sell to not only sell the business but to sell to you can be a challenge remotely. And then some elements of diligence are a little bit tricky as well. But I think in general, most of it can be done remotely, but some elements really require, the relationship building elements really require some in-person discussion.
Excellent. I'm just cognizant of time, so we'll go through this last topic very quickly with the panelists. Now, almost everyone understands that playbooks are bodies of knowledge, whereas integration is a skill. Yet we all I'm not saying we all, but organizations generally over-index on the playbook part of it. What are some of your thoughts on how much you should rely on them versus not? Jim, maybe we can use some words of wisdom from you.
Sure. Some people that are probably out there in attendance have heard me say this more than once and quite broadly at times. I think playbooks are important and playbooks are foundational. I think playbooks need to be written because it exhibits a grasp of the work and what is required to do the work. And back in the old days when they were written and put into a white binder, I think, my experience was they were then put on a shelf and just referred to or acknowledged that they existed. And the reason I think, in my experience, again, it's like I like to run a nimble and agile process to the best of my ability. And the reason for that is because M&A by definition is just fraught with chaos and ambiguity. So if you sit there and think you're going to refer to a checklist to give you the answer on a problem that might or might not be referenced in that playbook, you're sadly mistaken. I think with, M&A integration is all about critical thinking and problem solving. And it might be in the playbook, it might not be in the playbook. I think it's much better to sit there and try and think one's way through the problem versus going and trying to blow all the dust off the playbook. And then most likely referring to a checklist, which is most of the playbooks I've been around are literally embellished checklists. And people, especially people that are new to M&A. I mean, I learned M&A integration the hard way. It was like literally running through the minefield and track spikes and stepping on every landmine. I think there's a lot of experience out there now that people can leverage and talking to people, but it's now where you need to rely on people's experience to get through the process, which I think is much better than a written playbook. It just doesn't lend itself. People like checklists that, 1 through 100. And I've seen people get really wrapped around the axle. And I've asked some of my team, like, okay, when you don't need to do number 8, what do you do? And, it's like, well, I'm stuck on 7. It's like, no, just go to 9, just keep moving. I think that's where playbooks inhibit progress. My experience in M&A integrations, just keep moving. You can clean things up as they go along, just don't make big mistakes and just keep moving is really my experience in that.
Yeah, I'll add on one comment. I love the body of knowledge and example of, look, you don't want somebody get stuck in, I got to go with process 1, process 2, process 3, and if I can't do 4, somebody who's more junior on the team or one of the work streams or one of the countries, or I don't know what to do. Be like, just let's move forward. Like the example we were talking about before, a playbook or an instruction manual. Kumar, you calling it a body of knowledge. I'm actually not talking to you from home. In the COVID context, I am traveling. This is not my home office. I'm in a hotel room in Texas. But imagine when I fly home later tonight, if the captain gets on the loudspeaker and says, we'll be cruising at 35,000 feet and they're going to have a nice flight. And, by the way, I was one of the engineers who designed this plane. I wrote the instruction manual. I've read everything about the aerodynamics and fluid dynamics, and I'm a PhD Caltech physicist. Oh, and by the way, this is the first time I'm flying a plane. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight, right? It doesn't, because I've read the manual and know the quote unquote steps, doesn't mean that I'm actually going to be able to fly the plane. So to Jim's point on continuous problem solving, every day is kind of whack-a-mole a little bit, and sitting well with ambiguity, but not getting stuck in a process for a process sake. I mean, yes, there are things that companies need to follow in terms of their risk management processes, and let alone the regulatory requirements. Those you probably can't sidestep. But in terms of block and tackle M&A planning execution, there's many different ways of quote unquote skinning the cat in order to reach your objective, or in my case, flying back home to Philadelphia.
Excellent. We have one question. In the post-COVID era, how do you manage change management and setting expectations to protect a deal value? Well, I think managing change is the same. You have to dimension the change first. COVID is yet another vector. You can have 20 other vectors to manage. I think the key is to dimension it. The problem I've had with the change management part is, and several of you on the audience side have heard me drive this very hard, is that if you don't dimension change, you're never going to change it. Where change occurs is in the BU or in the function or in the geography, and you need to go into an element of specificity rather than the fluffy side of it. What is changing? Is your title changing, role changing, location changing, systems changing, compensation changing? Get to the brass tacks there. Same goes to coronavirus. Don't go with those fluffy charts and change curves and all. They don't manifest into economic value. It never does. Manage the hard change where it occurs. So that's been my way of looking at things, and it keeps things very simple. It's a little bit difficult to position this question on why COVID is just another change. If you dimension it well, you can solve it, in my view. But would love to hear my other colleagues' thoughts.
I'll chime in real quick. I think my experience, I'm not a big believer of having change management to be a separate work stream and or a separate function.
No, it's embedded into everything you do.
It is. And that's exactly where I was going. And it needs to be, everybody working on the project needs to have change management as part of their thought process and problem solving process. It has to be real time. It's just another thing to deal with, as you were referencing. You deal with it real time and you keep iterating on it, and then it's dealt with. But if you try to separate it, it's destined for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is great. I think we are also on time, but we have about 4 minutes. We can take any question, can be addressed broadly to the panel or specific individuals, going back into what we talked about, or anything we haven't talked about. Let's give it another 30 seconds to see if there's any questions. Actually, yeah, go ahead.
I'll have a question. Is it okay if I ask a question to the panel?
Absolutely.
So we're talking about cross-border merger integrations. We started with the topic, that no deals are created equal, and one of the big, at least in my experience, if you're buying a company end to end, you're buying the whole thing, you're to buy out. That's very different than if you're buying a carved out business from another large corporation, or you're buying a business from a PE firm, or you're buying a part of a business that's owned by a PE firm. So as you think about cross-border merger integration, given those two, you buy the whole thing or you buy, a carved out business, what are some of the main things that come to your mind in terms of managing risk, the planning process, the complexity of TSAs? What are the things that, quote unquote, have kept you up at night? But now you're here, so you lived through them.
Yeah, so maybe I can go on that. I think one of the biggest myths in this world is that a divestiture or a carve out is the symmetric mirror image of an integration. Also, financial buyers and strategic buyers look at things very differently. Just the way metrics are measured, right? Strategic buyers want EBIT and revenue synergy and all that, which is interesting. Financial buyers measure it by run rate costs. They're okay with one-time costs. They're not okay with run rate costs. So that kind of changes on how you look at execution. The other thing that Jim alluded to on the legal entity side becomes very crazy. And I've lived this with a large company, 5,800 legal entities completely optimized for tax. When you sort of break them, the dyssynergy that runs up from unoptimized posture of operations runs into billions of dollars. And it's very, very challenging to do that. In fact, we couldn't even break the company in the way we wanted because of that. So it had to be broken in a completely different way and disentangled in a different way. The other thing is that people who don't integrate cleanly cannot divest cleanly. That also becomes a big problem. If you integrate it in a nice and clean manner, it can be disentangled in a clean manner. Right, that's sort of the two real nuances, and then TSAs become an excuse for the most part, and you start to run into thousands of them, hundreds of them, depending on the deal size, and they're an excuse for not separating. So the goal is that not to have TSAs to the extent possible, right? That's been 2 or 3 that I can think of from the top of my head.
And I'll just add real quick. I think, again, in my experience, because I'm never going to be the smartest person in the room, and I know that phrase is just overused a lot, but for me, it's real. And I think in either scenario, Greg, I think what gets lost very quickly in the process is the why the deal is being done. And then it's why is it being done the way it's being done? Why are we buying just assets, or why are we not trying to get the whole thing? And the longer you hang on to the strategic rationale, which for me is the why, the longer you have to ponder what the right next step is. And it doesn't mean you take a lot of time doing it, because I'm all about pace and speed in deals. But I also think some people, usually at more senior levels, want just get it done, go, 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 go. And that's when things get missed. And then you get to Nitin's comment, then you get to that legal entity in some country it takes 5 years to deal with and ends up costing another, exorbitant amount of money to close down. And you're like, well, we rushed early to get to this point, and now we have to rush back to tie it back to the why, because I think the why gets lost really quickly in the process.
To sum it up, I think clean integration is really important. If you don't integrate cleanly, this work is never going away. 5 years later, it'll be called restructuring, transformation, call it whatever, right? Reorganization. It's just never going away.
Well, and I think to the term that gets used frequently, I think Greg and Jeff have both used it, the goal in integration is to get to business as usual, right? That's the goal. But I had somebody on my team one time says, because the acronym is BAU, as we all know. And they said, what if the U is unusual, not usual? And that's where I think we fool ourselves to think it's always business as usual, because sometimes you slip into business as unusual, which then gets to the dyssynergies and other comments that Nitin made. So I think, again, the longer you can stay in the simple world of understanding the why, the better, I use the boulder, rock, pebble scenario a lot with my teams and with my work. It's like stay at the boulders level as long as possible, as long as it makes sense, to make sure that downstream it's all understood and that why and strategic rationale is carried through the whole process.
Super. Well, I got the warning shot. So thank you again for a very engaging and interesting discussion. Obviously, it's always a pleasure to meet seasoned people who know what they're talking about, and hopefully the audience took away immense value from the experiences that you all brought. Again, my honor to moderate a panel with experiences like you guys.
Thank you, Nitin.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nitin, for driving.
Thanks, everyone. Very good.
Thank you.
So that was an amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Nitin, for moderating the panel. Also, a big thank you to Greg, Jim, Rishabh, and Jeff for this fruitful discussion. We would now have a 10 minutes break, and we would get back at 9:20 a.m. CDT for our second round of panel discussion on the topic, identifying and mitigating culture risk in M&A. Thank you.